Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's The Metro on WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the show, money talks in Michigan politics. But should it speak in secret?
Advocates say it's time for dark money donors to step into the light.
Plus, a state lawmaker is sounding the alarm on some of ICE's latest actions under the Trump administration.
Representative My Song says Hmong refugees who entered the country legally are sitting in detention, and she's pushing for answers.
And the Afrofuture Festival unites powerful voices and major headliners from across the African diaspora next week.
We'll discuss why the festival, which originated in Ghana, selected Detroit to host its first ever event in the U.S.
But first, Michigan residents are feeling the heat in more ways than one. Energy bills are on the rise. Now, these higher costs are driven by extreme summer temps, outdated power grids, and a recent $217 million rate hike approved for DTE Energy by state regulators earlier this year. Meanwhile, federal clean energy incentives that once encouraged investment in renewable energy are starting to phase out. Michigan was on track to increase its renewable energy capacity. But with key federal tax credits repealed by the Trump administration, the state now faces higher costs in the future and delayed renewable projects. At the same time, utility shutoffs nationwide have surged. And these shutoffs are hitting lower income and marginalized communities really hard. Joining us to discuss energy affordability and sustainability in Michigan and what we can do about it is Nick Schreck. He's Dean of the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law and an expert in environmental law and justice. Dean Schreck, welcome back to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So we've laid out some of the factors pushing Michigan's energy bills higher. But I'm wondering from a policy perspective, how much of this increase was inevitable and how much reflects decisions that could have been made differently by utilities or regulators?
Well, a lot of it is when you talk about utilities and you talk about electricity generation, many of these decisions for future infrastructure investments, I mean, they need to be made years in advance, right? And you don't want to be reactive because the shorter the time horizon it is to make investments, the more expensive it will be. So what I mean by that is that really 20 years ago, we should have been planning for a fully renewable energy future. You definitely had advocates, I'll credit myself at the time, saying we needed to be moving in this direction, pushing for more renewable energy. And that's because the cost of the fuel is free, right? So wind, solar, geothermal, these are fuels that drive electricity generation of renewables where there's no expense associated with it. When we continue to rely on coal and natural gas as primary sources of electricity generation, those are finite resources. The cost of them, of coal and natural gas, fluctuates over time. And of course, it contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions that warm our climate. And so getting off of coal and natural gas as soon as possible is really important. The problem is all of the reasons you just laid out in the intro, we're moving away from that direction, that clean energy future. So it's very frustrating. DTE, consumers, our major utilities in the state have begrudgingly been moving towards more renewable energy, but they've been pushed, and they've had to be pushed from environmental groups, from citizens organizations to really try and get us on that path. It's incredibly frustrating sitting here today that we're seeing those rollbacks at the federal level in investments in clean energy and renewable energy, because that was really helping drive us there. With our state policy, we had some minimal advancements again over the last 15, 20 years, but we weren't anywhere near where we have to be to ensure that we have clean air to breathe, that we have fresh water to drink, and that we can keep utility bills manageable for our residents. We're unfortunately not on that path today, and we need some significant changes.
And of course, central to this conversation are the utility giants that you've mentioned, DTE Energy and Consumers Energy specifically. It has me wondering about municipal run utilities like the one in Sacramento and the one here in our backyard in Wyandotte, which offer cheaper energy bills. And notably, they also service less people than, say, DTE or PGE in California. Why do you think municipal run utilities often offer cheaper rates than corporate ones do?
Well, there's several reasons there. I mean, for one, if we just take DTE for example, they have multiple missions. One of them is to provide electricity to us in their service area, but another is to return value to their shareholders and to basically make it so that shareholders will earn more money over time on their investment. And so if you have a fully publicly owned utility that doesn't have that profit motivation as part of their calculus, that can save some costs and that can make it more affordable to provide power to their customers. Okay. So, however, you also mentioned the scale. And so with DTE, I mean, this is, again, a massive service area, millions of customers as part of their network. So there is a significant expense in providing electrical services to all those people. Now, if you take that profit motivation out of it, I think you could definitely return more savings to our investors. They'll say that, well, that's a way for us the utility to raise money on the market through bonds and that type of thing. But I think that is a key difference, right? When you take out that incentive, or not incentive, that motivation from these companies to really drive their share price higher to return money to their investors, if you take that away, that's just more resources that can be poured into providing cheaper, more reliable electricity to their customers.
Meanwhile, these utility giants like DTE, they say one of the reasons that they're raising rates significantly is to pay for overdue, upgrades. But critics argue customers are now paying essentially for decades of underinvestment by these same utilities. Where do you stand, Dean Schreck, on the fairness of having residents shoulder these infrastructure costs?
Well, I am very frustrated as a DTE customer. I have been most of my life. And, recently I had to upgrade. I added a switch so that I can have a generator plugged into my house, into our electric panel, because we would lose power so regularly. We'd be without electricity for days. Food spoilage, all of just the headaches of trying to navigate without having electricity was incredibly frustrating. I also don't like the rate increases as they continue. So I'm a customer, and I feel that personally, although I'm fortunate to be able to absorb some of those costs within our household, I know that's not the same for all of my neighbors. So I don't think it's fair that we continue to go back to ratepayers and say, okay, we need increases in your rate to actually pay for these upgrades that we should have been doing for decades. I think that is wrong. I would say, go back to your shareholders. Go back to looking at raising money where you're going to pay back investments over time through your corporation, rather than consistently going back and asking ratepayers to shoulder that burden. It's getting to be untenable. And it's getting to a point where like you said, that we have more people that are in arrears, that are struggling with debt, or that are unable to pay these utility bills, and they're having service shut off. That's also not where we need to be. So it's a complicated system. It is more efficient for all of us to be hooked up to a larger system, to be hooked up to a utility. It's more efficient to deliver those services rather than having us on our own, all trying to, generate electricity on our own. That's a much more difficult model. And there should be some efficiencies with that scale. And I'll just go back to something we talked about at the beginning. The effectiveness of our utilities in our state legislature and at the federal level in being able to implement laws and policies that benefit them, sometimes to the detriment of their ratepayers, is problematic. And that's where I really think we need to see some legislation to rein in the strength of our utilities, the power of our utilities in the legislature, because they're able to get favorable deals for them as corporate entities, rather than for providing the public service that we all rely on.
Well, coming up on the Metro here in about 20 minutes, we're going to talk about a ballot initiative to get dark money out of politics in Michigan, including the money that is flowing from major utilities into the pockets of Michigan lawmakers. So we are going to dive into that a little bit more next. But to focus back on the utilities themselves and what they're doing, we know that DTE and Consumers Energy are regulated by a state agency, the Michigan Public Utilities Commission. What should it be doing, and what can it be doing to regulate rates? Is it doing enough?
Well, certainly the Public Service Commission, I think, could be doing more, and they can be pushing our publicly regulated utilities to save costs wherever possible and move towards, again, a clean energy future, which is really where we need to be headed. Often the way that works at the Utility Commission is through rate cases where they can be individuals, but often it's environmental organizations and their attorneys that intervene in these rate cases. You'll often also see the state attorney general pushing utilities through the Public Service Commission to, lower the amount of an increase that they're seeking on utility bills to fund infrastructure projects and that type of thing. But it's often done through there's sort of like mini trials that happen at the Public Service Commission where you have the utility saying, this is the amount of money we need to, upgrade our utility lines. And then you have interveners in these cases say, well, actually, no, you can do it much cheaper or differently by taking a different approach. And so that's often where these policy battles are fought. And they're not really well known. They're not, very, very public, although you can receive notice for these hearings if you'd like. If you're looking for something to do, you can go to Lansing and advocate. Yeah, but that's really where the meat of these decisions is made.
And in other words, these rate hikes are years in the making.
That's right. So it's a process. I mean, you'll have the utilities propose the rate hike, then it goes through this review by the Public Service Commission, and then there's an opportunity for basically legal review of those rate hikes. So it is a lengthy process. And then sometimes you'll see even additional litigation beyond the Public Service Commission, and you'll have, like Attorney General Nessel has often been pushing our utilities to provide services to ratepayers at a more affordable level. But again, it's a lengthy battle, lengthy process. What I would really like to see is state legislation passed that is, again, forcing our utilities to invest more in clean energy. We need to accelerate that process. And they've shown that it isn't something that they're willing to do voluntarily. They have to be forced by law in order to improve the percentage of renewable energy that they're generating and not relying as much on natural gas and coal.
Speaking of clean energy incentives and initiatives, I'm thinking about at the federal level how these incentives are being dismantled under the Trump administration. So how does the federal rollback affect Michigan's longer-term energy strategy? I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that Michigan needs to really lead on this now, and it's not so far, and it's going to need to make a total 180.
So if we take a step back, we do not have a federal climate change law, right? We don't have a Clean Water Act or a Clean Climate Act that we can point to say this is the bill that will drive our energy future to make sure that we have a healthy climate for today and for future generations. We don't have that, right? So what the Obama administration and the Biden administration attempted to do was to use the existing Clean Air Act to try and push us towards a more clean energy future by phasing out coal and natural gas and moving towards renewable energy. They did that largely through administrative policies through the Environmental Protection Agency. Well, the first Trump administration and now in the current Trump administration, those policies were paused or challenged in the courts. Now they're being rolled back. So you had the Biden administration attempted to go at another route. They said, okay, we're going to pass a big law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and we're going to add all sorts of incentives in that law to promote clean energy development. And so that's a lot of those incentives at the federal level or what were recently rolled back by the Trump administration and by Congress. So to answer your question, there isn't as much financing available for renewable energy projects flowing into the state. This also hit, red states very hard, red areas of the country very hard. We're seeing significant renewable energy investments in Kansas and in North and South Dakota. And so a lot of that is now the rug's being pulled out. Many of these projects that were in the pipeline will be delayed or canceled. Very unfortunate. So you had this regulatory approach, which was tied up in the courts or overturned. You had this spending approach, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's now been rescinded. So we're really in a tough spot. And I would say at the state level, there are things that we can do. We can have state legislation that will drive us towards a higher percentage of renewable energy generation across the grid, right, across our electric grid. That's something we can do. We could also look at state incentives through the tax code that we control with the Michigan sales tax and with investments that we make here in the state. There's a lot of focus on roads. I think we really need to focus also on our utility grid and on the generation of electricity. And that's something that I hope that the governor and then also the legislature can look at, because there's money there, right? There's money in the state budget that we make decisions. We make policy decisions every day in our legislature about how we're going to invest the money that we all generate through taxes and fees and all of that. I think a lot more of it needs to be focused on getting to a clean energy future, or we're going to just continue bumping along in this environment where we are not making the strides that we need to have a more positive future. I'm hopeful that messaging can be bipartisan, that messaging can be something that we all get behind, because we need clean air to breathe. We need a healthy environment to raise our families. And so that, again, I think we need to have that focus shift more at the state level towards investments in a clean energy future, while we're seeing this rollback and disinvestment at the federal level.
So state level action can mitigate rising energy costs, but there has to be the will and there has to be the unity in the State House, which we were just discussing on the Metro yesterday, is at a gridlock.
Right.
So this is feeling a little discouraging.
It is. And I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom. I mean, I will say this. There's a lot of things that we can do on our own, right? We can get a programmable thermostat. That's not a very expensive thing to add to our house, where we can, keep the heat a little bit lower in the winter, the temperature a little bit lower, which will save some money. We can have that programmable thermostat if we have air conditioning in our home, keep that a little bit higher, right? Like set it at 78 degrees, which will still feel a lot better than the outdoor temperature, but that's a way to save some money. Also, reminder to folks that DTE, folks in that service area, they have this rate structure where between 3 and 7 p.m., the rates increase for electricity use. So making sure that we're not running the washer and dryer, we're not doing heavy energy intensive activities during 3 to 7 p.m. That can also help people save money on their bills. So there are steps you can take. More insulation, swapping out your windows. And unfortunately, some of the incentives we had for those types of activities are now gone, but there are steps that people can take individually to lower their utility bills. I
mean, I have spoken with advocates who've mentioned the 3 to 7 time as being actually something really difficult for lower income folks, for communities of color to reckon with, that is sort of a luxury to be able to not use power during those times. Yeah. And as we think about the people who are disproportionately affected by rising utility rates, I realize you've studied environmental justice extensively. So how do these, let's think about, before I let you go, shutoffs. I think we should acknowledge those before ending this conversation. How do those disconnections reflect deeper systemic issues in our energy policies?
We should, here in 2025, in the wealthiest country in the world, we should be able to deliver electricity cheaply and affordably to everyone that needs it, and so that they can, use it for important day-to-day things like health, sanitation, making sure that they've got, a warm room for their children to sleep in, clean water to drink, that type of thing. It is wrong and insulting that we are at a place where we're having this discussion. Okay, so I'll put that out there, that it is a failure. It is a policy failure. It is a failure of our political leadership and political will that we're at this point. The 3 to 7 p.m. time frame, it is very challenging. I understand that. I was just mentioning that to try it to the extent you can, game that system so that we're not, if there is an opportunity to do things like run the dryer, the clothes dryer earlier in the day, that will save some money. The reason why the rates spike at that time is because typically that is the hotter time of the day in the summer, where more electricity generation is needed for us to run air conditioners and that kind of thing. So there is a reason for it, but I do acknowledge that does impact users. Again, people that really aren't the problem. I mean, we're talking
Right.
about the big users here are, large industrial facilities. I mean, they're the ones that are really sucking in a lot of that power. And so putting any of this back on individuals, I think is problematic. These need to be system-wide changes and decisions that aren't putting the onus on the individual household to make these changes. That's unfair and it's wrong. And so yeah, we definitely need to acknowledge that. But again, just saying that there are some small things we can do in our own households that can hopefully save us a little bit of money. But the real problem is at the policy level. It's at the state law and federal law level, where we have not put systems in place that can provide clean, affordable power to everyone. And we should be able to do that. We have the ability to. It's I think it's, again, the profit motivation that is a big driver of it, and it is a lack of political will in our legislatures to get that done.
Nick Schreck, Dean of the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. Thank you for your expertise today discussing energy, the environment, and environmental justice.
Thank you.
DTE Energy and Consumers Energy are financial supporters of WDET. This is the Metro on WDET. The Detroit mayoral race is now down to 2 candidates. Yesterday, Mary Sheffield and Solomon Kinloch Jr. came out on top of the mayoral primary election. Sheffield had a majority of total votes, with Kinloch beating out the rest of the field. The mayoral general election is November 4th. We'll talk more about the election results in Detroit and around the region tomorrow with Pat Batchelor. Coming up, corporate dollars influence our elections. That's no secret. And many times, because of dark money, we aren't allowed to know the source of those dollars. That is the secret. But one group is trying to change all that. We'll learn more. Stay with us here on the Metro.